the upwind side of those two dead skunks in the middle of the road back there. Well, hello YouTube. Born to be Wild NE here, and as always, NE stands for Nebraska. Go Big Red D Huskers. Okay, this is going to be a short vid to be added to my political and social commentary playlist, so do not listen to the rest of it, watch the rest of it if that is not up your alley. I want to talk a short bit about some facts behind the current impeachment inquiry underway in the House of Representatives. The impeachment inquiry is consisting primarily of depositions and witness interrogations behind closed doors in closed session of 3 committees of the House of Representatives. All members of those committees, regardless of their party, are welcome to attend all of those sessions and have equal participation rights in all those sessions. I hear a lot about saying that the GOP is shut out of this process, and the facts are that there's about somewhere in the mid-40s number of GOP representatives who are fully eligible to attend and fully participate. You hear a lot about them being closed and not out in the open. And actually, when you think about what they're trying to do here, they're trying to gather evidence, what evidence there may or may not be. And if you look at the corollary to that in law enforcement, let's say law enforcement grabs four people that they suspect of being involved in a crime. Law enforcement doesn't interrogate those 4 people together. They split them up and interrogate them individually. Law enforcement doesn't interrogate them in public. And there's some basic common sense reasons for some of that. They don't want the various folks to know what the other people are saying and thus be able to kind of falsely coordinate their stories. So it's pretty common sense to have these things happen behind closed doors. And it's pretty equitable, in my opinion, because members of both parties or independents that are part of those committees fully participate, or at least they have the opportunity to fully participate. Not only do members, but staff members of all the members, both Democrat and Republican, have a chance to participate. The impeachment inquiry is not impeachment. It is like law enforcement trying to gather up the evidence, trying to find out as many of the facts as they can. That's not a phase where a lot of cross-examination goes on in the law enforcement setting. It's a phase of gathering evidence. And if someone is found to be withholding evidence or manipulating or falsifying evidence, that is very likely obstruction of justice. So the impeachment inquiry, as it's happening today, equates to law enforcement's efforts of gathering evidence. That gathering of evidence is happening with full representation from both political parties. quite frankly, I'm not aware if there's an independent on any of those three committees or not. Now, it is true that this particular impeachment inquiry was not voted on by the full House, but there's nothing that either in the Constitution or in House rules that suggests that it has to be. We, in today's world, those of us who are alive, some of us remember the Nixon impeachment, and more of us remember the Clinton impeachment. And both those impeachment proceedings, inquiries, if you will, were voted on by the full House. But even there's a difference between those two and the current impeachment inquiry. In both of those other two, there were special counsels. And those special counsels did the evidence gathering and the witness interrogation and questioning, etc. So that the House didn't have to function in that capacity, nearly to the extent that it does today, because there is no special counsel who's doing the evidence gathering. So I know this is very, I don't know if emotional is the right word, but I mean there's obviously huge differences between people who support Mr. Trump and people who oppose Mr. Trump about this impeachment inquiry. But that's where it stands. So once it's complete, once the House, and to be honest and straightforward, the Democrats have control of the House, so they get to control the agenda within the rules of the House, just like Republicans get to control the agenda within the rules of the House when they are in the majority of the House. That's the way the House of Representatives works. As an example is when Trey Gowdy had his special investigation into Benghazi. I saw an old clip of him talking to a newscaster explaining that they had held about 50 hearings to date, as of the date of that interview. It was to Chuck Todd. And he said, and almost all of them have been closed doors. And he went on to say, that's smart to do it behind closed doors. He added a new wrinkle, which I think a lot of us kind of logically suspect. He said, in a closed door session, the representatives that attend don't showboat for the cameras. Both parties now. This is nonpartisan. And so the sessions are more productive. They're more focused and they're more productive. This is Trey Gowdy speaking from a few years ago. So once the impeachment inquiry gets to a point where House leadership feels they have reached a point where they can make a go, no-go decision on whether to actually draw up and attempt to prosecute articles of impeachment, this is what's going to happen. So if the House leadership looks at, and this is Democrats, obviously, they're leading the House, they're in majority. If they look at the evidence that they've gathered, the testimony they've gathered, and they feel that there's sufficient cause to write up articles of impeachment and put it to a vote of the full House, that's what will happen. And in that full House hearing about impeachment, prior to everybody voting about impeachment, there's going to be due process. There's going to be testimony and cross-examination, etc., etc. So then the full House would have to vote whether to impeach or not. In the House, that's a simple majority vote. So unless there are some Democrats who do not vote for impeachment, more than likely it would pass if the House leadership chooses to write up articles and prosecute them. So if it passes in the House, which is a likelihood if the articles of impeachment are prosecuted, then that would pass more than likely. Now that piece of it, the impeachment proceeding in the House, is sort of like a grand jury, if you will. The impeachment inquiry gathers the evidence. If there is an impeachment proceeding in the House, that will be like presenting all that evidence to a grand jury. And you can think of all your House of Representative members as jurors on the grand jury. And they will listen to the evidence. And in fact, it goes a little bit beyond the grand jury, because in grand jury there's no cross-examination, etc. But in the House, on an impeachment proceeding, there would be. And then there'll be a full vote in the House. And this stuff will happen in public. So the public will get to know findings. Obviously, if there's any national security issues, as always, those would be redacted. Can't imagine that there's going to be a lot of that in this particular situation, but what do I know? So then the grand jury, or the House, will decide whether to issue indictments or prosecute or take the case to a trial. There's a simple majority vote in the House. And if they vote in the affirmative, which more than likely, if impeachment proceedings do happen in the House, more than likely they're going to pass. So that moves on to the Senate. And in the Senate, that's where the trial is, right? And there will be presentation of evidence, there'll be cross-examination, and due process. Now in the Senate, as most of us probably know, once that phase of presenting evidence, cross-examination, presenting witnesses, etc., is complete, and once it goes to a vote, it takes 67 senators to vote to convict. And if less than 67 senators vote to convict, the president would not be convicted, would not be kicked out of office, or removed of office is the more appropriate term for this process. So, you think about today's Senate, there's like 53 Republican senators, so the Republicans have the majority in the Senate, and it would take 16 or 17 of those folks to vote to convict, along with every Democrat and every independent. So unless the evidence is really strong, and we don't know what the evidence is going to be, and we have the evidence that has been put out into the public so far, but that's not been subject to cross-examination, other than it has been subjected to challenges in the closed-door sessions by Republicans and Republican staff members that attend. So I don't think we've heard any leaks coming from the Republican side saying, oh, this evidence that's been put out in the public domain is wrong or being interpreted incorrectly or anything like that. I don't think we've heard any of that to date. This is being recorded on the Saturday before Halloween in 2019. So that's the process, and a lot of people are attacking the process, calling it unfair, calling it not following due process. They never elaborate on those general complaints, which I think is one key and one indication that it's just bitching and complaining. Because when you think about it, as I've described it here, it's proceeding as it should. There needs to be evidence gathered, and both parties are fully participating in that process. It's being done behind closed doors for really good common sense reasons. Should the leadership of the House look at the accumulated evidence and testimony and decide that they believe it's worthy of drawing up articles of impeachment and taking it into an impeachment proceeding in the House, they will so do. And if it goes to that, in the House there will be due process. There will be examination and cross-examination of witnesses and testimony and of evidence, etc., etc. Then, once that's complete, there'd be a vote in the House. And if that passes, it'll get sent to the Senate for a trial. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court presides over that trial. That's Chief Justice John Roberts. And there would be due process once again in that trial, during the trial. So, you know, I just don't see all the attacking of the process, the people involved in the process, as being accurate. And I think you need to let the process play out. There needs to be due process. The president deserves that, as all accused do. And if this moves forward out of the impeachment inquiry, there will be due process, probably twice. And even above that, the spin and stuff from all the parties in the public sphere, outside of the official proceedings in the House and then in the Senate. So I don't know. It's just to me, it's political games being played, trying to whip up a frenzy among this group or that group. If you have read, there are 4 things out there right now. At least I'm aware of 4. Maybe there's more. If you've read those, and if you've listened to Mr. Trump and Mr. McVaney or his acting chief of staff, and seen the videos of them talking, to me, there is certainly cause to investigate this situation. It's not a situation that should just be, it happened, so what? Big deal. No big deal. We'll just let it go. The allegation is that Trump abused his power by taking funds that the Congress had directed and approved be given to the Ukraine so they could buy anti-tank missiles as they defend themselves against Russian and Russian-backed militia in the eastern part of the Ukraine. So this is like, pretty important to Ukraine, right? It's like self-survival. They need those weapons. And the allegation is that Trump said, we'll give you this money and these weapons if you will do 2 things. Look into the Biden involvement in Ukraine and the gas company that the younger Biden was a board of director member of, Burisma, I think it is. And then the second thing is going back to the 2016 election. There's this theory out there. I'm going to call it a conspiracy theory because I believe that's what it is, but others may differ here. That the DNC server that was hacked by the Russians is in Ukraine, and there'll be evidence on it or around it that it wasn't Russia that did the hacking, but it was Ukraine or people in Ukraine. So I guess, but both those things, are intended to help Mr. Trump in the 2020 election. So he's alleged, he's alleged to have used our tax money, withholding our tax money, as sort of a quid pro quo or a bribe or leverage to get the Ukrainians to do what he wants them to do as far as investigations of certain situations. And if that happened, A, that's against the law, B, that's abuse of presidential power, it's also betraying the Constitution and his oath of office, if that's what happened. So it's a fairly serious thing, the allegation. And I think it justifies investigation. So we shall see what plays out and what doesn't play out. And I'm sure as this thing becomes more and more public, as it moves into subsequent phases, if it moves into subsequent phases, more and more of the public will be smarter and smarter as far as what facts are or are not uncovered. And we'll see where it goes. I have no way of knowing. None of you listening or viewing have any way of knowing where it's going. If it didn't happen, that's great. If it did happen, it's pretty darn serious. It really is a challenge to our democracy and our way of electing our president, if it happened. So there's 4 documents. One is the first whistleblower's report, which was reviewed by the IG, the Inspector General, determined to be credible and move forward through the process. Then there's the call summary record released by the White House. Then there's a set of text messages that were provided by Volker during his testimony and deposition, if you will. And then most recently there's the opening statement by Taylor, who is our current lead diplomat to the Ukraine. Secretary of State Pompeo called him out of retirement. I believe it was May of this year, to fill that post after the ambassador to Ukraine was recalled. So those documents, if you read them, and if you're interested in getting a well-rounded view and perspective, you should read them. They're available out there on the web. And if you're not interested in that, then forget it. But I would caution you to understand for yourself that your opinion is only partially informed and definitely not fully informed if you haven't read those 4 documents. So let's see where it goes. My opinion is it's worthy of investigation after having seen those documents and hearing the president say what he said and hearing his acting chief of staff saying what he said. You know, if you've heard all that and you've read all that and you feel differently, that's I mean, you've got the right to your opinion. I want to make sure we're putting country ahead of personality, putting country ahead of loyalty, potentially blind loyalty to a specific personality. I think our country will be better off for it now and in the future. If we degrade our democracy now and allow this type of abuse of power to happen again, if it happened this time, that hurts our country. Regardless of what you think or don't think about Mr. Trump, it hurts our country if that is what happened and we let it go unaddressed. Hastings, Nebraska. Anyway, guys, turned out to be a lot longer than I intended it or thought it would be. Take care, all.